everyone. It's Wellington here from Trauma Impact. I'm your host, and I'm so happy to have you guys on the show. Please subscribe every single week. We're going to focus on a different type of trauma with a different guest, different gender, different background, different nationality, and we're really going to unpack trauma to its core and just see how it affects us, how it affects people's lives, but most importantly, how you can be inspired to come out to the show and speak about your trauma, but also overcome your own and inspire those around you. I do look forward to engaging with you all. Please comment on the videos and subscribe again. I love you guys very much, and I will see you on our videos. Take care. Fantastic. Hi, everyone. It's Wellington here, and I'm here with my lovely wife, Paula. This is our first episode for our podcast series titled Trauma Unpacked, where we are going to look at different people who have been through different types of trauma throughout different stages of their life and look into that and really unpack it from its core and get more details to, sort of how people deal with trauma, what trauma looks like to different people, because you can agree that trauma is it's an important topic, but it's a complex topic. It's not simple. And I think that's the fun of, I wouldn't say trauma's not a fun thing, but it's definitely the interesting thing about trauma is that it's so complex and there's so many ways to look at it. And there's so many people who have so many different experiences of trauma. So this is our first episode, and it's featuring myself, the host of the show, along with my lovely wife, where we're going to look at my life and my traumas and so on and so forth. And we'll have more episodes moving forward on a weekly basis where we bring different people onto our podcast, onto our show, to speak about their experiences with trauma. So yeah, do enjoy, sit back and relax. It is our first episode, and we're really looking forward to just exploring trauma with you all and for you guys to understand and learn more about trauma. And hopefully we have some of the viewers come out on the show sometime as well. We definitely want it to be an open space for people to speak openly about of the things they have been through. So I'll hand it over to my lovely wife to introduce herself briefly, and then we'll go straight into it, straight into me and my trauma and my experiences and my story. And again, I'm so excited to get going. But I'll hand over to my lovely wife to sort of take over from here. And let's go.
Thank you, baby. I'm just excited to be here to learn about people's way of life, their trauma, how they overcame it, and just really excited to share it with everyone. And I will just start with the first question for you. So what does trauma mean to you?
What does trauma mean to me? I think that's a really good question, because I think the general view of trauma is that it's sort of this, it's intense. It's a very severe experience. I think where you kind of go through something that impacts you in a negative way. That could be mentally, that could be emotionally, spiritually, physically. There's physical trauma too. There's different types of trauma. But for me personally, I think it's something that leaves a lasting impact on someone because of an intense experience that leaves a lasting impact on someone's life. And it's something that if it's not dealt with, it can have a negative hold on someone if it's not dealt with properly, depending on how severe the trauma is. But at the same time, there's people who they know they're traumatized, but they can ignore it and still kind of function without dealing with the trauma, which is, I think that's also a way of dealing with it. So I would say, if you want like a definition, I would say it's definitely something that leaves a lasting mark on you, and I would say in a negative way. But trauma can be turned into a positive thing. It can bring out good in you once it's dealt with. But I think initially it is a negative, it's a bad experience that leaves a negative impact on you. And it affects you, how you function, how you go about your life. That's how I would say trauma is. From my experience, from what I've seen other people go through. It's definitely not a positive thing. It's not a nice thing. When you say trauma, it's not something that you think about and be like, oh, that's nice. It's not. So yeah, I think that
Yeah.
to me that's what it would mean generally. Yeah.
So, what would you say was your first personal experience with trauma?
My first personal experience of my life.
Yeah.
My first personal experience with trauma. Um, I'm going way back now. Like I'm trying to think, because I can't remember my life before I was like 6, like 7. Like I think the earliest memories I have are like 7 years old. So from there, I would honestly, my first personal experience with trauma was a physical trauma. I was 8 years old. So I was 8 years old, and I was a stubborn kid. Like I was such a rebellious, wild kid. I just liked being, extreme and doing crazy stuff. And we were in London. This is before I moved. By the way, guys, I'll get to that later on where I'm from and everything. But I was in London. I was 7 years old, and I was running outside. I was just playing around. It was at this family party or something, and I fell down and I kind of hit my shin off the. It was actually like the corner of a like those like a what's the word now? The corner of like a curb, you could say basically. Literally the sharp corner of it. My shin went bam, and then I literally got hit. And I was only like 7 or 8 years old. And I remember because I was so stubborn, I didn't tell my mom about it, and I just toughened up and dealt with it. Although I was like 7 years old, until the wound got infected, and I wake up one morning, my whole leg's black, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then I'm trying to hide it. My mom comes in and she takes the sheets off the bed, and she sees that my leg is black and it's rotting, and I'm like, what's going? I was a kid. I'm like, what in the world is going on? So definitely don't hide stuff from people. But yeah, that's literally what happened. And I went to hospital, and the infection was so bad, my leg, the doctor said my leg was this close to getting cut off. And they operated on it, and then thankfully I still have my leg. But literally, I think that was my first yeah, that was my first trauma, I guess, a physical trauma to my leg. Yeah, and to this day my leg still has the mark on it, and if I do injure it, it would get infected again. So it's like the trauma is still there.
Nice. And what would you say was your greatest trauma that you faced in life?
The greatest trauma I faced was probably I've had a few traumas. I think I've had a few traumatic experiences. But I would say the one that stuck with me the most, um, that's a tough question because I think trauma is there's a few of them for me. But I think based on the way I define trauma, it's what sticks with you, like what impacts you the most. And I think for me, it was definitely had to be lack of money, the trauma of lack of money, the trauma of lack of resources, the trauma of sort of not having enough when you want enough. That was definitely a stronghold on me when I was a child. I would say that, and even bullying. I mean, I was bullied in school severely. I was bullied because I was black. I was bullied because of my financial situation. So hence why I think it was a big trauma, because that enhanced it. And also I was black. So I think you can intertwine the bullying into it too, because it did magnify certain things. And this trauma happened, just to give you some context, when I was about, I must have been like 12 years old, 13 years old, when I first encountered bullying. And I think because I was bullied because I was black, and then bullied because, hey, I wasn't rich like the other kids at school, that then made me more aware of that situation, because it didn't bother me much until I think the bullying started. And then that's when I was like, I want to get out of the situation. So That was intense. That was intense going through that as a young boy who was in a new country. I just moved to Canada. Who went through that experience. It was very traumatic. Um, I didn't like going to school as a kid. I hated school. I didn't want to be there. So it impacted me in different areas. Even with in different areas because it was kind of happening constantly as a young child in a situation where you could not go to school. You had to be there.
Yeah.
And it was something that was hard to stop. So it was something I just had to deal with as a young boy. He was only 12, 13, 14, 15. I dealt with it for years. So I grew up in that situation, and it stuck with me as a late teenager going into a young adult, going into my 20s. That experience stuck with me, and it shaped me. It made me sort of, you know, make certain decisions and live a certain way and have certain goals off the back end of that experience.
So just going back with the lack of money, can you tell us in a specific example that you faced, that you witnessed in your family that stands out to you?
Um, there were many experiences. I think for example, to give you some more context, I moved to Canada under very, I would say, um, under very unfortunate circumstances. And I think when that happened, because money was never an issue when I wasn't exposed to that. I don't know if it was. I didn't know because I was like only a kid. I didn't know. I didn't think about bills or anything. Right, your parents do all that stuff. So I didn't know what the financial situation was. But from the way I lived, it was good. We lived in a nice apartment, had a swimming pool in the back. You know, I didn't see any like, oh no, there's no money or anything like that. I got what I wanted. I just wanted to play and have fun, and I got nice presents for Christmas and all that stuff. So I never experienced it. I think when I moved to Canada, that's when it happened, and there were many times. I mean, for example, say food, for instance, right? Like just buying food was a I'd see my mom go to food banks. I'd sort of see kind of, okay, we're now going to this extreme where we have to go to a food bank. We're not going to a grocery, like you think you go to Tesco or whatever it is to get groceries, but going to somewhere where you see people queuing up outside for food, you see people are homeless, and all this stuff. As a child, you realize, oh gosh, actually, um, this is hard. So something's wrong. Like something's wrong. And then I think after that it was just the living condition. Kind of comparing your life to other people living in big houses, you're living in a small place, and then you're wondering, oh gosh, why is that happening? And then just just asking for money or asking for a present or wanting stuff, but you're told that we just don't have the money for that. And those experiences then made me aware that, hold on, I don't have money. I don't have the same life as other people. And I think from there it was, okay, how do I stop this? But as a child, there's only so much you can do. You have to kind of deal with the cards you're dealt with. But that was it. It was just literally, it just came down to, yeah, it just came down to being aware of what was going on. And when I would ask, because I was quite a curious teenager, I would ask questions, and then yeah, just being told we don't have money, and this is why we don't have money. And yeah, that was it. But it was just numerous examples. You weren't given the same presents. You weren't living the same conditions. You weren't buying things the same way. You have to be careful as a child. You have to be very careful how you're spending or asking to spend money. You're aware of these things, and you have to adapt to that.
Okay. So, and in terms of the bullying, was that related to your financial situation?
Yeah, not the. I mean, they didn't know money, but they knew lifestyle. They knew, okay, we know where you live. You know, you don't have a. I mean, your dad. You're being raised by a single mom. We know where you live. We know, what your life is like at home. Those kind of things, and then comparing it to theirs, like, hey, my dad's rich. We live in a mansion. We live like this. We're better than you. That's what the bullying was based around. And then on top of that, I was black I was black in an all white school. So that was another thing. Whereas you're different to everyone, and racism. I mean, I never faced racism head on. like that. I mean, I was aware. I mean, I learned about racism in school. I learned about hate. I learned about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all these great black figures and so on and so forth. And it was funny because at the time when this started happening, Obama was actually became president, and I think that was actually I got bullied more because something that was good, right? Good for the black community was having black president. It was amazing, but for me it was like, man, like I was bullied because of these things. But no, I did get bullied because of my lifestyle, because of the way I lived, and people knew about it, and saw themselves as superior to me. So I had to deal with that.
Did you experience any physical abuse?
I did experience physical abuse. Sort of in Canada and the US, we call it recess, which is basically like playtime. We call it recess. So yeah, you go out and play, and people don't want to play with you. You get kicked. You get pushed on the floor. People would spit on you sometimes and call you the N-word and all this stuff. And we got physically abused as well. I got physically abused. Definitely pushed around, kicked, punched, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So what made you realize that you were traumatized?
I mean, I didn't think I was. I didn't know what trauma was at that age. You just know life sucks, but you don't know like this is traumatizing. I think as I grew up, as I got older, I think in my like early 20s, when I was like 20, like maybe 19, 20, 21, when I was more aware of trauma and what that is, and more aware of mental health and those kind of things, depression. That's when you're aware that, hold on a second, I've been through these things. Even through, because I think the thing is, I couldn't relate to anyone in school because I was black. There's no other black people. There's no other black boys at school. So there's no black people apart from me, my little sister. We were both black, but there's no other black people at school who are going through the same thing. So I felt very much like an outsider. So there's no one there who I can relate to say that I'm being traumatized, I'm being bullied. It's just me. So I think it's hard for people to identify something if there's nothing to relate what you're going through to, or someone for you to be like connect to, like, okay, we're kind of going through it. It was just me. So there was no there was no awareness of that until I came out of the situation, until I'd grown up a bit and I was a certain way in my life. I had a certain personality, certain character because of those experiences. That's when you look back and say, hold on a second, that was a horrible experience. And I didn't even call it trauma. I just called it, whatever. It was bad child, whatever you want to call it. But I didn't. That word trauma wasn't used until I knew what it was. Until I was like aware of, okay, trauma is a real thing. But I would say it was until I grew up, until I was educated about trauma, about mental health specifically, where I realized, listen, I went through some scary things, some tough stuff that kids shouldn't go through. Some kids haven't been through at that age.
Yeah.
So that's when I realized it. I think through education, through information, through the internet, through watching videos, through seeing other people, like, okay, hold on a second, I went through that too. It's like a lot of people will say, like, a lot of people have been sexually abused, right? And they don't know at the time it's sexual abuse until they realize later on, hold on a second, I was sexually abused. But they don't know at the time because there's just no awareness that other people are going through this. And it's identified as this is what it is, So
specifically, can you tell us what was it that made you realize?
Specifically, for me, I mean, I'll speak about this later on, in more detail, but for me specifically, it was escapism. It was film. It was seeing other characters, and as a young age when I was watching movies and sort of escaping reality, you could say, not from reality, but trying to cope with what I was going through, and movies being a way to deal with it. And when you watch a film, films have characters, they have people, whether they're fictional or non-fictional. These are people who are going through films, a lot of films are good because the people go through hard things, right?
Yeah.
And that's when I saw people I could relate to for the first time, and that's when I realized these people are. I think I am traumatized. I've been through. This person's been through it, so I must be traumatized. I must be, yeah, affected by what happened in a negative way. In a negative way.
Okay. So when facing the lack of money and the bullying and everything, did this impact the way you view the world, your identity, and your relationships?
It did impact the way I view the world. Definitely. I think obviously when I was, because I think if you're that young, I was only what, I was what, 13 when it first happened, 13, 14, when I first was exposed to these bullying and exposed to people who have power. Because I think when you're bullied, it's someone trying to assert power over you, who knows they can have power over you, and they're keeping you inferior to them. Which is a evil heart to have, right? And seeing that, even trying to get help at the time, not getting help because of your race. So obviously, it did impact the way I view the world. It did impact. I did see people a certain way. It did impact me in terms of how I interact with the people. I think I didn't trust people. I didn't trust people very easily. It was like, yeah, I'm very careful with people. I wasn't vulnerable with people. I wasn't open with anyone. I always thought the worst of people first. I didn't think of people as being good people. I didn't see that. I always thought the worst of people, where I looked at the bad parts of people and like, that's who they are, and that's what I need to be careful of. Because I didn't trust people. I didn't trust people. I thought people had the ability to be mean, because that's all I went through. I didn't have a lot of people apart from my mother and my sister at the time. Those were the only people who were nice to me. Mm-hmm. So, who I knew would be nice to me rather. So I didn't. In terms of relationships, I gravitated towards certain personality types. I didn't like authority figures. So I didn't have good relationships with people who were leaders. I didn't have good relationships with anyone who had any form of authority, whether it was like a parent, whether it was like a teacher, whether it was a church leader, whether it was whatever, anyone who had authority. I didn't like that. I didn't like feeling like I was under someone's control or under someone's authority, and I wanted to be in authority to keep myself safe. So it impacted that. I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be in charge. I wanted that position because of the security it brought. So I didn't have good relationships with people who came across as though this person wants to be in charge all the time. This person is in charge, and I would challenge people who are in charge. I wouldn't shy away from them. I would never trust them. I wouldn't submit to them or follow them. I always wanted to lead. I didn't trust authority figures. Definitely no. People who had that aura about them, I would challenge them. I wouldn't let them force that on me, and I wouldn't have close relationships with them. And I would gravitate more towards people when I would get enough time with them, I thought, this person is nice. This person is not going to cause problems. This person is kind-hearted. Those are the kinds of people that I would deliberately, on purpose, make sure I surrounded myself with. People were peaceful, and I think if I had a sense of this person is not peaceful, I wouldn't. I'd be cautious with them. I would withdraw. And if I felt like that person was trying to dominate me, or they wanted that power, I would challenge the authority or not. Sort of, that's the way I wanted to be a leader. I think I wanted to be in charge.
Okay. And growing up with all these experiences, did that cause any bitterness, anger, resentment towards anything or anyone?
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh yeah. I mean, I was very vengeful. I was bitter. 100%. I think that became, because when you're living like that on a daily basis, so you go to school on Monday to Friday. You're at school all the time, right? Your life is school. So when you're living like that every day as a child, you're constantly being bullied, you're constantly being abused, you're constantly going through all this stuff. It builds up a lot of anger and bitterness and hatred. You know, you start building a lot of negative feelings, and it becomes the default emotion. It becomes like the natural thing is to be bitter. So it did. No, I was bitter. I was bitter. I was. I didn't forgive. I was bitter. Yeah, I did become very bitter. It affected me because obviously I was raised a Christian, and I stopped being a Christian because of the bitterness, towards the higher power, towards God. You know, because I felt like, why am I in this situation? Why me? Why not the other kids at school? Why did you pick me? Why not someone else? What did I do? What did I do? Because I thought I was a cool kid. I was like, I've done nothing wrong. So I was like, this is not fair. So when you talk about relationship, I think earlier you mentioned relationships. My relationship with spirituality or with God or that idea. So I became an open. I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but I definitely believed there was some kind of higher power in control of life. But the God that I saw in the Bible, or because obviously I was raised a Christian, so the God that I grew up under, I look at him differently. I didn't view him the same until I mean that view kind of got impacted way later down the line of my life, way later down. But that did impact me in terms of, about in terms of relationship with the higher power, with God. Yeah, I didn't want anything to do with it, and I think the bitterness started with God, and then it sort of perpetuated to other people. You know,
Like who?
Like I said earlier, I think just anyone who I felt. I mean, I just didn't have good relationships with authority figures. I was very rebellious. So it was anyone who would, anyone who I had to listen to, anyone I had to obey. I didn't like being in that position because I knew the danger of following someone. I didn't trust people's intentions. I didn't like people. I would always think initially people have got bad intentions, so I didn't trust them.
So how did you overcome this bitterness?
To say, I think I dealt with it. I didn't overcome it. I didn't say I wouldn't say I overcame it. You mean during my childhood or just up to now?
Up to now. Or what helped you to overcome your trauma?
For me, it was definitely Phil. It was 100% because, again, because you don't know you're traumatized, you don't know how to deal with it because you don't know what it is. You don't even know. So it's like accidentally, I think through watching film, it wasn't intentional. But for example, I'll tell you the one film now up to this day that I think sort of saved me. I wouldn't say saved me, but I think that helped me was Batman Begins. As a young boy, Batman was my favorite superhero. I just liked the film, liked the cartoons and everything. So I remember this film comes out and I was watching it. I must have been like, the first time I watched it properly was when I was like 15, probably like 14, 15. I had watched the film. And the film was dealing with a character, Bruce Wayne before was Batman, who experienced loss. Whose parents were killed in front of him. And he was a vengeful young man who moves to Asia trying to find himself, trying to find a purpose because he felt lost. You can imagine that's a very traumatic experience to go through as a young boy. He moves to Asia and he gets trained by someone and how to channel those, sort of trained, but he chose himself to go down a positive route, to use this training he got from someone who was actually the bad guy in the movie, but he uses this training and he uses the resources he has, which he could have used to be evil, but he chose to rid the world of the evil that destroyed that traumatized him. Because it didn't destroy him, but it did traumatize him. And he embraced his own fear, he embraced his trauma, and he helped other people through that. And I found that quite inspiring because that's not an easy thing to do. You know, I think a lot of people deal with trauma very negatively. They become very vengeful. They become very, and I think, again, through watching film, I saw characters on the other end of the spectrum that didn't become good people. Their trauma turned them into criminals, into horrible people, you know. But with Batman, it was interesting how he had the same trauma, but he didn't do that. And that was inspiring. And I think for me that, because I could kind of relate to his pain, and I felt, okay, I can do that. That's a good example. That's an example, you know, because sometimes you think the only way to go down is the bad route. You don't know there's hope, and I think that film gave me hope. Like, okay, I can do something positive with my negative experiences, and that's how I dealt with it. That's how I dealt with it, was just remembering that was an inspiring example for me to follow, you know, and it happened with a character that I admired, you know, and yeah, I think it was very powerful. I think it was very powerful, and I think it's just thinking about it now. It's just interesting that kind of accidentally happened at a young age, because I feel like if I didn't watch that movie, I don't know how I would have dealt with it, because I didn't know what it was. So it kind of accidentally, it sort of just happened at the right time, you know.
Yeah, definitely, because I think it's a real thing that you can actually overcome trauma with therapy via cinema, movies. So you actually like your own therapist in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I think there definitely are examples in films. I think there's so many movies that, because movies are characters. I mean, and a lot of filmmakers are inspired to make movies because of what they've been through in their life. So they are telling stories about real things, real situations. You know, although yes, films are fiction. They're not real, but they are based on real situations. A lot of films are based on real life, and you can draw inspiration from them. You can definitely heal and learn lessons from many movies. I've learned lessons from so many films. And for me, that I think what you're saying about film is even a form of escapism. You know, escapism is a thing. But some people use music. Some people escape with music. They'll listen to a certain song, they'll escape via music. Some people, escape, just different ways. Some people do different things to escape reality temporarily, as a coping mechanism. It is a real thing, and I think film is a form of it can be a form of escapism for people who just want to detach and unplug.
Can you give us other examples more in detail about how you used escapism to overcome your trauma?
Um, Other examples, I would say, because for me it was a great. I mean, I used to watch a lot of anime as well when I was young. When I was young, and it just, yeah, it was just a good way to sort of unplug from everything, and you want to be like these characters, right? Although these are anime characters, these are super powered people, and you're like, wow, I want to be like, I want to be awesome, I want to go up and be great, um, So you watch a lot of things like that. I watched a lot of other films. I think Star Wars was a big one on me as well. Which Star Wars, believe it or not, is actually based on the Bible. A lot of the Star Wars is actually based on biblical situations and characters. You have the main antagonist, Darth Vader, who's actually a representation of people who are sort of half good, half bad. That struggle between the people have. You look at someone like Palpatine, Emperor Palpatine, who's like the devil, right? He's evil. He brings the worst out of people. And then you look at Luke Skywalker, who's like a Jesus Christ figure who always believes in people no matter what. He believed in Vader until the very end. And when everyone gave up on him, he still believed in Vader. And without saying any spoilers, people haven't watched it, but he believes in Vader. I won't say anything more because I don't want to spoil the movie. But yeah, it's literally, you look at those dynamics, and I think then you can draw inspiration. People can look at that and be like, wow, actually, it's very inspiring, not to give up on people. Even if people have fallen, way down the line, you look at people who've kind of like, even spiritually, yes, there's people they think I'm too far away from God. I'm so far off. How can I be rescued back? And you look at Vader, he did horrible things. He killed kids, like he did evil things. But Luke still saw good in him, and it's like, that's kind of God, right? God still believes in us, even when we're like, when we're lost, when we're beyond lost. He's still like, no, like, I'm still waiting for you to come back. And I think that film that was very nice as well. Watching the Star Wars films, I think it sort of showed me all those different dynamics between characters, you know. And I think just generally films are just a way. There were even some films, right? There were films where there weren't any moral, you know, any social commentary, but I think it was also just a way for me to be like, listen, I just don't want to think about what's going on in real life. I just want to watch a movie, or I want to watch anime, I want to watch this, and I would just fall into that world, and then you stop watching it and come back to real life, right? So it was just that, escaping, a way to run away. It was a way to temporarily just get out of everything that was happening. For me, you know, it was definitely something that, yeah, I tried to get away from.
Okay. So, what would you say to someone who's experiencing what you went through? What would your advice be to them?
Just someone who's experiencing the same things. Um, it's tough, you know, because I think people who go through any kind of trauma, it is tough because for me anyway, it was very lonely. Trauma wasn't fun. It's not fun, especially when you live in, like, I think there's depths to trauma as well, because there's trauma where, for example, the first example I gave you, I told you I got hit my leg. That is trauma, because I got hit my leg, broke my leg in the hospital, leg's about to get amputated, but my leg got better, and that's it. That's still trauma, but that's not, you know, I would say for me personally, I don't know, there's different degrees. There's people damage their brains and do it through, but something like what I went through wasn't horrible. It didn't like scar me for life. It was just like, I look back at it now and kind of laugh about it. Like, what was I thinking, right? It's like sounds like a joke, but it's still trauma, you know? So I think that's maybe like the top layer of trauma, where it's like if trauma is like floors or different layers, that's at the top. That's like surface topish, where it's like, yeah, physical trauma. But you go deeper, with people who are living in horrible circumstances and who come out of it, but their scars are deeper because they lived in it. And I think my heart goes out to people like that, because I think it's hard for people to relate to that if they haven't lived through trauma. And I think a lot of people have been traumatized, but haven't lived it. Like, it's not been their day-to-day life, where the trauma every day. And that's horrible. And I'm just thankful. I mean, because I don't know if I didn't watch, if I didn't watch that film at that time, at that age, I don't know how my outlook would have been. You know, I really don't know. So I think it kind of happened accidentally, but I don't believe in accidents. But it happened at the right time. It was a good coincidence that it happened. But for people who want maybe a deliberate way of dealing with trauma, I would say you got to find someone or something that inspires you. You've got to I think it's important to find people who are also going through the same thing. Because the worst thing is being on your own. And I think if you stay on your own, that's when trauma's horrible. That's when it's an issue. That's when it's like, you know what? That's when it's just so hard to deal with, because there's no one, you can't pinpoint anyone else. You can't relate to someone. You can't do anything. So you've got to find something that gives you a glimmer of hope, or something to be like, you know what? I'm going to get out of this. But I know it's easier said than done, because to go through that on a daily basis is horrible. And I've seen worse stories than mine. I'm just like, people, my heart goes out to them, because it's like, it's hard. And I think you just have to find some form of inspiration, whether that inspiration is biblical, whether it's going to spiritual roots, whether it's going down, for example, with me, it was film. Some people, it's finding a community. I think now in this generation, you have a lot of these social meetup apps, and you've got people who there's apps that are geared towards, like, just like our YouTube channel. There's things like this where it's like, you've got a community that can relate to you, so you're not on your own. You know, and I think for me, that was the key, because I felt, when I watched that film, I was like, hold on, I'm out. It's not just me. There must be people in real life who go through this. And that's opened the door for me to be like, okay, this is different. This is another way to deal with it. Because if you're on your own, you don't know how to deal with it. You just deal with it how you think it should be dealt with, because you don't have anyone to tell you, or any examples, or anyone to relate to. And I think that's the hard thing. I think because a lot of people can be judged. I think people can be so judgmental to people who are traumatized, who are deeply traumatized, who are depressed, without knowing what they've actually been through, or relating to them. I think that's the sad thing. I think it is something that should be dealt with the right way. And I think if people listen, I don't know how to deal with your trauma. It's okay to tell someone that, because I think then it's like you don't come across like, oh, you're because I think the problem is, and I'll go into my upbringing and sort of me being black. I think even being a black man as well is a huge part of trauma, because a lot of cultures, a lot of backgrounds, I think they view life a certain way, and I think because they deal with life differently, their trauma is dealt differently. You know, they because they have a certain mentality or outlook. I know, especially in the black community, especially with men in general, toughen up, just crack on. These traumas are ignored. If you acknowledge your trauma, it's like, oh, that's nothing. But they don't realize that their traumas, man, it's already shaped who they are, and it's not being dealt with. And I think some upbringings, some cultures do have that mentality on people, which I think can be very dangerous. You know, for it can be very dangerous, and it really affects people and the adults they become, the people they become. And bearing in mind, you can't, trauma isn't just in childhood. You can be traumatized as an adult. Something can happen to you as a 40-year-old, 30-year-old adult. And I think that's another thing I've realized too, is that a lot of times even adults get traumatized, but they think I'm old now. I should just, I'm a grown up, but it's like, no, trauma can come anytime, different stages of your life. And I think there is maybe a sense, because again, I think with children, they're more fragile, So I think, of course, and I think it's justified to definitely have maybe more of a heart to childhood trauma, because children are innocent, right? But I think at the same time, I think adults also are human, and I think adults do get traumatized too.
So just on that topic of, men finding it hard to open up, to share how they feel, I remember you mentioned that you struggled to be vulnerable. So what helped you to change that?
It's interesting because vulnerability is viewed as a weakness. And one thing I didn't want to be when I was because when I was a boy, I was honestly, I was weak, but I wasn't like, I was a skinny little kid when I was young. I was quite a frail, skinny kid, I was easy to pick on. So I think when I grew up, I was like, listen, that's not happening. And I changed. But one thing I didn't want to be weak. When I grew up, I'm like, I can't be weak. I have to do everything to be as strong as possible in every area. So I did that. So the reason why I wasn't open was because the perception was that for men, it's weak to be open. It's weak to be vulnerable. It's weak to even sit here and talk about your problems. It's weak. It's like, that's for women to do, right? You look at the suicide rates, men are killing themselves more than women. I think it's like 70% of suicides are men. That's unbelievable. That's a huge difference. And there's a reason. And I think it's because men, they bottle up everything. Their traumas are bottled up and they can't deal with it. So they say, I'm just going to kill myself. Right? Which is like, yeah. So if it's so tough to not be vulnerable, then why are you killing yourself? So then I think my whole view of what men are changed. Like what it means to be a man, that view changed. And I think because that view changed, I realized, okay, hold on, vulnerability is actually courage. Because if you look at the word, if you call someone a coward is someone who's scared to do something. So it's like, if you're scared to be open about your feelings, you're being a coward, right? Because you're scared to do it. So I'm like, actually, no. So it's actually, if it's hard to be open, then I'm going to be open then, So that's when that all changed. And my whole view of what a real man what it means to be a real man changed. And I thought part of being a real man is the ability to face your fears, whatever those fears are. And if your fear is to get open, then it's a fear you should conquer and be open about. And that shows you have courage, because not many men are doing that, So it's like, I think that's the issue. I think with a lot of men, the perception of bravery, or what it means to be brave, it's distorted. It's brave just means don't get open, just don't say anything, just bottle it up inside and
Don't cry,
all that stuff. But if you look at it medically, there's even medically it says it's actually bad for your health. Firstly, your body's actually supposed to cry, and you're supposed to get open. It doesn't mean you're a wimp. It doesn't mean you get open and you turn into a wimp. That's not what it means. But you can get open and talk about how you feel, but you still deal with it. You still face the problem and try and deal with it. But there's no problem. You're just saying, hey, I'm not having a good day today, or I'm sad because this happened. I mean, I've seen men have family members who've died and they don't do anything. They don't even cry. I'm like, that's not normal. But you must feel like there's no way. That shows you how bad it is, because they won't even get open about, if someone dies who's close to you, it's okay to cry. Like, it shows you care, right? It's like, what's wrong with that? Even biblically, when I did kind of come back to the gospel, when I was sort of in my mid-20s, looking at the most powerful man who's lived is Jesus Christ. There's no one who can sit here and tell me Jesus wasn't if you look at Jesus' life, he cried when his friend died. He cried so much. He was a vulnerable person. He expressed his feelings. He sat down with people and spent time with them. He wasn't aggressive. He never got into a fight. He never had a physical fight with anyone. If anything, he said, if someone hits you, turn the other cheek, Yeah, this guy was God. This guy you could see, guy had powers. He was God. He rose from the dead. He could do everything. He had all power. He didn't need money, But I wouldn't say and say because Jesus cried, he wasn't a real man. But it shows you that, he gave the example of that's how men should behave. He was never aggressive. If anything, he called himself gentle. And I think the word gentle and soft, those are two different things. But he called himself gentle and humble, and that's how he described himself. So for me, that was like, okay, that's a good example, because there's a reason why the men are killing themselves now. And, if men are just if they're quitting on their life, way more than why are women not doing it? If women are weaker than men, why are the women not? Women should be killing themselves more, but they're not, which is very interesting. So I think it's a very dangerous. It's definitely trauma among men as well is another problem, and I think even with black men as well, the black community, it's not dealt with properly, and I think that's those stats show everything. It shows the truth, and I think why. I think that's why it is. Because trauma is a real thing. It's a real thing in our world, in our society, but it's just not being dealt with properly. But I think with women, it is being dealt with very well. I think with women, not very well. It's been dealt with better than it has been dealt with men. So, you know what I mean? So I think that there's definitely a lot of room for improvement with men with trauma. Just being open and speaking about it, seeking advice, and finding inspiration, finding someone to relate to, or something to relate to give you some kind of hope. Because if you don't get that hope, that trauma will destroy you. You either take your life. That can happen. You can take your life. You can go down a dark path. You can become evil. There's so many people who've, you look at R. Kelly, he was sexually abused as a child. But that trauma was not dealt with. And what happened to him? He became a sexual abuser himself, a mass sexual abuser, because he was traumatized by his sexual abuse, but he didn't deal with it properly. And I think a lot of that's a black man's mentality, just to keep going, ignore it. But when you ignore something, it just builds up. It shaped his character, his personality. He became the thing that destroyed him, and the cycle repeated himself. He hurt so many women. Look how many women he destroyed, because he didn't deal with his pain, his trauma. I could say the same for Michael Jackson. Something must have happened. I've not looked into Michael Jackson's childhood much, but I'm sure he must have been abused too, as sexually abused. But again, these people turn into these kind of monsters.
Yeah.
The monster is born somewhere. And that's what happens with men. And especially with black men. It's quite sad. So that's my advice, is just to find inspiration from something. Find something you're passionate about. Find someone you can, a good example. Try to find something, whether it's a YouTube channel, whether it's, and I think therapy's changed, because therapy doesn't just mean I have to go pay for a therapist and sit down in a room. and talk about my problems. Because I've heard stories where some therapists don't. I'll be respectful of therapists. I think therapists are great, but there are therapists who are just doing the job, who are just there to get paid. I mean, it's a job, right? And I think, that's not the only way you can get therapy. You can if it means YouTube channel, if it means movies, if, like you said, there's different ways of being your own therapist or helping yourself. If it is talking therapy, fair enough. If that's the thing, what you think will help you, that's fine. But I think these things need to be dealt with, and people can't just go through life with traumas that they know they have, but try to ignore it, and they wonder why they can't. Their life is just kind of stuck, because there's so many strongholds they have that are a problem, you know. So I think with Black men, yeah, it's definitely. That's why I'm so passionate about like bringing a lot of Black men on the show as well and speaking to them and seeing how they dealt with it, because I think it's a problem I've seen is that with Black men, with men in general, yeah, it's definitely a huge thing. It's a huge underlying like a disease, It's like it's not dealt with. It's not dealt with. So I would say that. I would say get some inspiration, and find a way to deal with it. From a spiritual perspective, and that's another big thing, because I think, again, I've been on both ends of the spectrum. I've been, obviously, I was raised in the church. I fell off for like almost 10 years, right? Completely went back into it. And I think I can see why people, because I can see why people are kind of, when you bring up God to help them, they're resistant. Because I think there are people, when they're traumatized, and when you're lonely, it's similar to when Jesus was on the cross. When you're lonely, what's the first thing to think? Where's God? Where's this God they talk about? And I can see why they have that stance. But I think it's important for people who want to help people who are traumatized, to not be so judgmental and just be like, listen, I get it. Like, I get why they have that mentality. But that doesn't mean you can't help that one day they can't, be brought to God. But I think there's a way to do it with kind of care and understanding. Because that's one way to help people, is to put yourself in their shoes. And I think a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are very judgmental.
So what helped you reconnect with God after having that gap of 10 years where you were resentful towards him and you didn't want to know anything about him?
It was inspiration. It was people. Because I think with me, I grew up in church. My dad was a preacher, right? I didn't grow up in church like most people did, like where it was kind of like, yeah, we go to church every Sunday, which is fine. We pray over our food, we go to church, it's just like the normal Christian life. I had the normal Christian life, but it was deeper because I grew up as a pastor's kid. So obviously this is church every day, prayer Fridays, you have people coming, speaking in tongues, praying until 6 a.m. in the house, you're sleeping as a kid, you're immersed in church. So I had a very deep kind of life with God anyway as a child. So it wasn't like I didn't know the Bible. I didn't know the rights and wrongs. It was ingrained, like that was ingrained from a young age. So obviously, I think when I did get traumatized and when all this stuff did happen, and then you're just kind of like, okay, let me explore a different path. But you kind of already know the biblical principles. You already know that stuff. So for me, it was just like, I was exhausted because of the church. I was like, listen, I know everything. I've seen hidden sins. I've seen secrets, and I've seen everything, right? But that's the dark side of the church too. So I was like, listen, I was done with the general church, the idea of church. I was just like, listen, I don't want to go through that again, kind of thing. But I met some people who were different, who were the kind of people I was looking for. Like, okay, these people are not the soft, I want to say soft, but they're not the wishy-washy. They're serious, they're serious Christians. They've got some grit about them. They've got some, some care about them. They care about me. And I remember, studying the Bible with these people and talking to them how I'm speaking to you about my life, my trauma, and there being a level of compassion and understanding, and not being so like, oh, here's the Bible, like accept it. It was more like, okay, we get it, we get where you are. And I think those people, having those kinds of people, it helped me. It softened my heart up, and I was like, listen, I'll give this a shot, because of the kinds of people who brought me to that stage. And I think that's very important. And I think that's what I was saying earlier, that it's important not to be judgmental, because a lot of people are way too judgmental of people who, I think that's the perception. If someone's like, I don't believe in God, like, oh, you're evil. Like, a lot of Christians do that, right? Where it's like, but it's looking at the roots. Well, why are they there? And be like, okay, I'd probably be the same if I went through what that person went through. Not everyone's as fortunate as certain people, right? So it's just like, I felt that there was a compassion. They understood me. And there were other people who were traumatized like me. So I felt comfortable, and I felt like, hold on, I'm out. I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt like, okay, these are the kinds of people I've been looking for since I went through that bullying 10 years ago. It's been leading up to this. These are the kinds of people that I didn't know were there. And on top of that, those people are Christians. How? I want to find out about this. And I was intrigued by that. And I saw what they did, and I saw how they got over. I saw them, and I saw different kinds of traumatized people and men. Obviously, those women too who were traumatized, but it was the men. I was like, they're men like me. And they're men who are not running away from the trauma, but they're dealing with it.
And they're being open.
And they're being open, and they're being honest. And that drew me to God. There was that drew me to God. Because I already knew the Bible. I already knew the scriptures. Like, there's not one scripture you could have told me to make me be like, yeah, I'm going to jump in. That was what it was. It was the people. And I think that's very important. It's very important, especially as Christians, to show that. And that is what love is. I think that is what love is. I think love is having compassion, like feeling other people's pain, and I think a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are quite cold. And I think that makes life worse for people, because they don't have examples. They don't have examples. They don't have people who are like, listen, it's kind of when that John 8, where Jesus is, where he's the prostitute, and he just kneels down, and he says, listen, he goes down to her level to help her, get up. But no one does that. Most people would be like the Pharisees, throwing stones at someone. That's what most people do. That's what people do. They throw stones. Like, oh, you're this. Oh, you're this. They just throw stones at you. Even Christians, You can kind of be very religious about it. We shouldn't be religious. Jesus was not religious. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the issue. That's the issue we're facing. And I think a lot of people who are traumatized do go to church. They do go to church to get recovery, because they think this is where I need help. They're done with the world's methods. They're done with talking therapy. They're done with all these other resources we have and all this stuff that, it doesn't work. It's like, okay, maybe God can help me. And I think it's very important, because when people come into a church environment, it's the people there who are ambassadors of God. And I think if you should take that very seriously, because if you treat people a certain way and they come into your church, that can push them away, and they have no hope, and they're stuck where Satan wants them to be, which is just going on in circles trying to heal their trauma, but they don't know there's no way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I think only God can truly heal you fully, but to get there, it starts with you going down to someone's level.
And I remember you said to me once, the church is for the sick, because sometimes we think, it's for the perfect people. It's for people who are good. I'm in a really bad state. I'm vengeful, resentful, sad. I shouldn't go. I don't want to go. But that's when we needed the most. And I think you helped me with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think church is for sick people. Sick spiritually and physically. Well, sick spiritually. Church is for people who are sick. People who need help. And that's what Jesus said. He said in the Bible that I've not come to call the righteous, which means people who are perfect, whatever the case is. I've come to call sinners. He sat down and ate with bad people. In today's context, Jesus would sit down with a mass murderer. He would sit down with Hitler and eat with him. But we would think, oh no way, like that's no, you can't sit down. You sit down with these Muslims who are, you know, you know what I mean? Like you sit down with a terrorist and eat with them. But we would think, oh no, that's like, you know, people go crazy over it. So I think it's like church is not, it doesn't mean that people in church are perfect, but I think there is an expectation that if you call yourself a Christian, right, you've got to carry yourself a certain way, because people watching you, people who don't know, you're like a walking Bible. They don't have time to read the Bible. They're not going to read the Bible. They don't understand the Bible. But people who are not religious, or people who are dumb, some people just don't like religion, right? But some people are just a nice person who's like, listen, I'll sit and eat with you. I'll listen to you. What did you go through? I'm sorry you went through that. Let's just go for lunch. Let me try to understand what happened to you. That's what converts people, rather than you push them away with religion and rebukes and whatever it is. You've got to bring them in with love, you know, and trying to understand, you know, what they're going through, you know. And I think that will make church, I think, a better place to be for a lot of people, because a lot of people do feel judged when they go into the church environment. If people have trauma and they come in and they feel, okay, I can't get open, I'm just in sin because I've got this trauma, it's me. I think a lot of people will get pushed away, and I think that's sad, because I think the church has the capability, and even biblically speaking, the church does heal. The Bible says by the stripes of Jesus we're healed. It does heal your trauma, Jesus Christ. But to get people to Jesus, there's a certain way to do that. And I don't think people do it the right way. I think people are very judgmental. A lot of Christians are very judgmental, and even impatient with people like that. And I think that's not right, because the Bible does say you have to be, love is patient. You have to, people don't change in one day. People don't get healed in one day. And I think that, I'm just speaking for me, what helped me. Because if, for example, if I went to church and I was just kicked away, I would have been like, oh, that was right. Like, these people are mean. But I saw something different. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key, is definitely giving people that hope that, listen, we're all in the same place. I mean, I think the most powerful thing, I did a Bible study, and part of this Bible study was to write down all your sins, like all the things that have happened to you, all the things you've done, right? And I think when I went through that one, that for me was the, like, wow, like, okay, we're all in the same boat. You people teach me the Bible. You've sinned like me. You're traumatized like me. You're not here saying, I'm the Bible study teacher, I'm perfect. You're like, no, I'm just like you, but I'm just teaching you the Bible. And that for me was, I respected that. And I admired that listen, okay, we're all the same, because we are. I think we shouldn't use our positions of power and to enforce dominance over people is in a Christian environment. That's not acceptable. And I think it's good to, everyone's on the same playing field. Yeah, some people serve, some people are called to preach, be pastors, whatever the case is, but still, you do it in humility, on the same level as everyone else, because we're all the same, you know. And I think you have to make people feel like you're the same as them, not like I'm a pastor, therefore I have a higher position, because people do get put off by that. Me personally, I don't like that. Like, harkening back to when I told you I didn't have a good relationship with authority figures, right? And I think if someone has a higher position, it's just how they carry themselves and present themselves to me, right? Because then if they're going to present themselves to me as I'm higher than you, I've got this position, you're beneath me, I'll shut off, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, that was the most important thing.
I think that's what I found refreshing about you when we first met. I think I was just being vulnerable and open, and you're just very understanding. You didn't bash me with the Bible and, like, you know, quotes and verses and stuff. And it was very refreshing to find someone like that, because I know you were in leadership as well in the church, but you didn't mention anything about leadership. You just came across very humble, you came to my level. And I think it's wonderful to see that what you've experienced, you're also spreading that with others, including myself, that they get to experience it. And I think I've had a lot of growth because of your experience as well. I've learned from you. And it's, you know, the things that you're saying here, you actually do them in real life, because I'm your wife. I get to see it. And it's just really, really wonderful.
It is. No, thanks, babe. I think no, it's important, because you go through something. This might sound dumb or whatever, but it is what I learned from the Batman film when I was a kid, which was that you go through something traumatic, but you can use the trauma to help be a hero, help other people. That was the principle I learned from that movie. That was it. That was what I took away from that film, and that's what I've just tried to, as I've grown up, and up to this day, that's what I've tried to remember. Because to this day, I still get bitter. I still get, because that's still a part of me. When I went through those things as a child, that's still a part of me. It always will be until I'm dead. Like it's a part of what I went through, but I can acknowledge that it's a part of me. So of course it's an area of, it's a sensitive area where I do get those feelings come. But when they come, it's just because I learned those principles from that film. And I learned, okay, listen, I just do what he did. I just turn it to positive, and help people. And I think I have compassion over people. Like you're saying, if people come speak to me and get open, they're vulnerable, they're going through certain things, they've been through something, I have more, I have a soft spot for people like that, because it's like, that was me too. So of course I'm here to listen and help out, because I'm like, I've been in your position as well. Like I've been there, and I want to help people like that get out of this, get out of that, because yeah, that's what I learned. I mean, that's what I learned from that film. And then I think on top of that, then then of course when you're a Christian and you, from a biblical perspective, then that enhances certain things where it's like, okay, that's actually the biblical thing to do, But for me, like I'm saying, that's why I kept telling, like for me, it wasn't the Bible initially that pulled me to the Bible. It was something else that drew me, that opened my heart enough to be like, okay, I'll sit with you and read the Bible and do a Bible study, right? That's a very strong thing to present to someone who doesn't love, like someone who doesn't love God. Say Bible study, it's like, whoa, no, you know what I mean? But I was brought there because of, for me, it was the movie. It was the film that changed developed a certain type of personality where I'd be open to that. Like, okay, is that a means to help or to help me? Okay, I'll sit here and listen to what you have to say. So with me, it's all about, yeah, people go through bad things, but it's like, what do you do to turn that around? What do you do to help people? How do you use your pain to help people? Not to hurt people, but to help them. Okay, I've been through that. I understand that. And that's the cure to a lot of the problems. And I think that's just the issue with the world in general. There's not people don't think like that. People just think, you have your problems, I have mine. Kind of everyone for themselves, right? I think your trauma, just deal with it. And I think it's horrible. Patience is important, being patient with people, understanding people where they come from. And I think that you have to, and I think people can find these answers in their passions. I was passionate, but I loved films. So as a child, I found the answer. And I think passion, art, music, sports, even sports. I've seen people, even, I think for me, even basketball. I was to talk the story about some of the basketball fans might know, LeBron James, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, Miami Heat, Big Three, how that team came together where you had three superstars on one team leave their egos and join one team to achieve a greater goal when they could be on their own team, having their own endorsements, more money, but they came together to achieve a greater purpose. And that inspired me when I was like, wow, that's very selfless from these millionaire athletes to do something like that just to win. And they're in their prime. It's like, that was, for me, that was another thing where, and I think there's even so many examples in sports, certain athletes, the way they conduct themselves. You can learn from athletes. You can learn from sports people. You can learn from art. You can learn from music. You can learn from so many people. But I think if you find your passion and you try and find inspiration in that passion, you can find something that will get you out of it. And I think everyone's got something that lights a fire in them, or in anything. I think there's always someone you can aspire to be like, or something that can pull you out of a problem. I think that's the great thing, is that there's people out there who do have powerful stories and powerful way that they've carried themselves. They've helped out. You know what I mean? I think even doing this podcast, I don't think I would do it if, I don't think I'd be here if I didn't learn a lot of these lessons as a child. I wouldn't be doing this podcast, So
Yeah.
there's so many people, there's so many ways to help yourself. And I think there's therapy. The word therapy doesn't just mean going to the therapy room. You know, that's not the only way. There's so many more ways to help yourself, to help people. You know, and I think that's very important. I think that's very important to look at. And the world is changing so much. We have these tools to do a podcast, to, you know, to do great things, to help ourselves, to help other people.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, I think talking about your problems is very important. Talking about what you've been through is very important. Yeah, but my conviction is just to try and, just make people better, help the world be better, to give back to give back to people, and using what I went through as a tool, you know, to help people, to understand people, you know, that's the key. And I think that's the mentality I want to have. And that's what I want to pass down to the generations, you know.
And I think you are doing that. I can see you're doing that with me, with everyone around you, with your sister. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, of course, babe. Of course.
We're coming towards the end of the episode. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to talk about?
No. I think it's been a great episode. I think I wasn't expecting to speak about the biblical side of it so much, but that was great too. Definitely speaking about the biblical side. I think that's everything. And I just think I want to just finish off by saying I just want people to really make an effort, if anything, because we'll bring more people onto the show. We've got so many different specific types of trauma. And I think it's just going to be really interesting to see how they dealt with it, what they're like now, you know? And I just hope people can, because not everyone's going to relate to me, and that's fine. I understand that. I'm not, you know, I've got a certain type of personality and certain type of story that might resonate with certain people. But we'll have people come in the show who with some women, obviously from different backgrounds, men who are older, younger, single parents. You get all these, a mixture of different kinds of people who've been traumatized, of course. And I think that's going to be fun, just seeing how, and I think people then can relate to, and I think that's the whole goal, because I was telling you, you need to find someone you can be like, you know, that person's going through the same thing. I think there's some hope here. And I hope when people come on this show and they can see that, they can see someone else, you know, who like, oh, okay, I can relate to them. And I hope people come on the show too, and they speak about their problems. They speak about what they've been through, because they can you can help someone else, and you don't even know. In your problem, you can still be a solution to someone else's problem, right? So that's what I hope to do. So no, in terms of covering anything off, I think that was everything. I think it was great. And I'm looking forward to the next episode with our next guest next week. So I think that's everything for now. All right, guys. So that was with me and my lovely wife. Please subscribe to our channel. There's a link below in the channel. I'll be putting out episodes every single week for Trauma Unpacked. This was episode 1. We'll be back with a very exciting episode next week, episode 2. And I'll give you guys a little intro into that, obviously after this video. But yeah, until then, please take care, and we'll see you next week on Trauma Unpacked. Thank you so much. We love you guys, and take care.